what we wanted to do was we wanted to see which were the most common problems that were found amongst newly married couples. And so what we did is we consulted both scholars as well as people in the social service field. And they came up with 6 common problems. 6 problems that were coming across their doors or their desks each and every day. Those problems were expectations, communication, in-laws, domestic violence, as you saw, finances, and pornography. And those were the 6 subjects that we will be addressing in our short documentary films. But Dr. Salimi also suggested that, look, we also have problems with respect to people who are already married. And we need something that will help empower people who are in the weeds, so to speak. And so, again, we went through a level of consultation, and we identified 4 areas. Mutual consultation, which is fairly obvious and is part of the faith. The Quran tells us, وَأَمْرَهُمْ شُورَ بَيْنَهُمْ, that the believers decide their affairs in mutual consultation. But also the idea of de-escalation. Does anybody know what I mean by de-escalation? What do you think de-escalation means, Brother Adnan? Just putting you on the spot, don't worry. De-escalation is basically taking that step back. You know, when you have an argument and things get really, really angry, but then there's a step that you take back to lower the emotional temperature of the discussion or the argument. So that's de-escalation. Listening effectively. You know, communication is one part of it, and as Sister Zubaydah pointed out, that sisters sometimes have more words than brothers. But it's not just about talking, it's also about listening. And the old saying that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. So to be able to listen effectively. What are we listening for? And finally, the idea of communicating effectively. You know, it's one thing to say that we talk to each other, but it's another thing to be able to talk in a way that is meaningful to your spouse. So those are the 4 films that you'll see, inshallah, in the coming year on their short documentaries with the same approach that will be for people who are already married. Okay. Now, the topic that I was given about marriage between modernity and tradition, it's interesting that, you know, from my short study of the prophetic era, that you find a lot of diversity. You find dynamic families. You find families where you had a traditional system where one person was earning the income or the provision for the family, and you also had the wife looking after the home, but you also had wives who were working. You also had women who were scholars. In some cases, they were actually even more educated or more learned than their husbands. You had extended families, and you also had nuclear families. And so the guidance that Islam has for us is remarkably prescient for our times. As Sister Zubaydah alluded to, that there's a great wealth of empowering tradition that we have, even in our day and time. And this certainly, to my mind, is a miracle and is emblematic of the fact that this guidance is divine. But there are certain things in our day that seem to be unique. And, you know, being a filmmaker, I would say that media has a major impact on our families, and especially our marriages. And one of the things that we talked about earlier on about a film on expectations. Expectations, especially for early marriages, can either make or break a marriage. It's interesting. How can your expectation of a marriage make or break your marriage? It's because a lot of us have been influenced by the media. Our expectation of what marriage is like or supposed to be has come from the media. And it's reinforced in popular culture. And what happens is that, for the guys, we're looking for the perfect woman, right? And for the sisters, they're looking for the Prince Charming. And so we have this seemingly innate understanding that we'll live happily ever after. And happily ever after means no problems, right? And you see this with kids. You see this in the films that, for example, all of the Disney princess films. I can rattle them off because I have 3 girls. But the thing is that, all of those films, all of the problems in the relationship are prior to marriage. After marriage, you see 2 words, the end. Right? As if nothing else happens. And yet, as we all know, it's the beginning of the journey. How media impacts our expectations. If you have your portable devices, you can type in the name. If you have a pen, you can write it down the old-fashioned way. His name is John Gottman, Gottman. John Gottman. And he has a number of books, one of which we found very beneficial for our website, was The 7 Principles of Successful Marriages. Okay? You can search his name and you'll see the book. But one of the keys for successful marriages is that when there's a disagreement, when there's an argument, when the emotional temperature rises, that you have a moment in which you try to repair the damage that's being done. Okay? It could be a word, it could be a joke, it could be a touch. But what it does is it lowers the emotional temperature. It starts to remind you of what is special about your spouse, what's important beyond the issue that's being argued. And that repair attempt does more for people to stay together, for spouses to stay together, than many, many other things. This idea that you know that things will be okay. Even when you're angry, even if you have a right to be angry, you know that things will be okay, that one or the other spouse is making an attempt to say, let's calm down, let's take it easy. And that brings the marriage back to a more of a normative track. So this is one of the important things. The other thing is that not always can you win an argument or solve an issue in one discussion. And if you get too angry, then take some time out. You know the hadith that if you're angry and you're standing, sit down, and if you're sitting, you lie down. This is something that the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said 14 centuries ago, and yet today we see people who are experts saying the same thing. Take a break. Detach yourself from the situation, right? So 20 to 30 minutes, what it helps to do is it helps for the body to cool down, right? The adrenaline that's going, especially in men, okay? When a man feels in a pressure situation, a lot of adrenaline is coursing through our system. And so that 20 or 30 minutes allows us to have lower our blood pressure, get a normal sort of biorhythm going, and then that's an opportunity for you to think about what's really important here. What do I want to say? And what can I live with? And then re-engage. The other thing that Rashad mentioned was this idea of vapor lock. And vapor lock is basically when the argument has become so emotional, has become hyper emotional, and basically now you're talking over each other or you're screaming over each other and nothing is making sense. Okay? So this idea of avoiding vapor lock, of making sure that you find another way to de-escalate before you get into it. Because at that point, nothing's going to help you. Okay? There are some other things, but I think we have time for questions and answers, and I believe Sheikh Salimi is also going to be speaking. So, inshallah, we'll carry on the discussion, and inshallah, we'll look forward to to further discussing these issues. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.